Hey, can you hear me?
Hey there, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing great, doing awesome.
If you want to start off by introducing yourself.
I'm Dallas Rosales. I mainly work in the digital marketing field, digital advertising, primarily towards roofing contractors. But on the side, I also compete in men's physique bodybuilding, working to make my way back into classic physique from there. But besides that, I also did a little bit of public speaking, and recently last year spoke at a TED Talk at a university over neuro-associative conditioning.
That's pretty cool. I definitely, I think the idea of like speaking and everything is so interesting to me because like so many people, it's funny how like it's the number one fear over death, and then some people just like love it. Some people hate it. It's crazy to me how it's like such as big. There's not anybody that's like, I don't really mind to, but it's like either you love it or you hate it.
Absolutely. And I think that it's kind of like people when it comes to like anything that's very like out of their comfort zone, whether it's skydiving or diving in general, it seems terrifying at first, but after the first couple times that you tried, you realize it's not always as bad and as dangerous as it seems.
So how did you get into fitness?
I grew up in a pretty athletic family, so right from the get-go, I was playing baseball for as long as I can remember, and eventually started moving in, playing baseball in my high school years, all throughout varsity as a pitcher. And throughout that time, I remained relatively pretty thin. I stayed at a constant height of about maybe 5'10", upwards to about 6 foot throughout all of high school, but still remained almost skin and bones that entire time. So it wasn't until I got out of high school and into college that I kind of realized maybe I want to put on a little bit more weight than kind of just going around at maybe 150 at 6 feet tall. So from that point on, that's whenever I started discovering more about the gym, kind of getting into a more consistent regimen from there. And initially, at first, I went in there with just the pure sole intention of nothing else matters. I just need to put on weight. I just need to get bigger somehow in some way. But after a while, it realized that it just became more of something that I enjoyed to do, something that became less of a goal and like a challenge for me to achieve, but more so something that I can learn to enjoy and learn to love and enjoy the process along the way.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think a lot of people struggle to get to the point to where it's enjoyable. I think a lot of times because they don't find what's enjoyable for them. They go to maybe the gym and that's the only thing they think is a workout or exercise. And there's so many different aspects to fitness and so many different ways you can achieve a good workout, not just going to the gym. And I think if people were more open to try new things and different ways of exercise, I think more people would feel the way you do because it doesn't have to just be lifting weights or walking on a treadmill or something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's why, I mean, there's always new programs, new things to try out when it comes to fitness, where if one facet doesn't work out for you, it doesn't mean that it's the end of the world and that staying in shape or going to the gym isn't right for you. There's always something out there to explore and try out.
Yeah, definitely. When you first got into it, did you have anybody to help you along? Or was it a friend or a parent or a coach? Was there anybody there to show you what to do really in the gym?
Yeah, whenever I first started getting more serious into fitness, I initially started training over at the Metroflex there in Arlington. And I got a trainer over there under the name Slaughter, which, given Metroflex's reputation as a hardcore training facility, I mean, I would like to say I kind of landed spot on in that. And generally from that point on, training under Slaughter for several months, I really got that foundation for how to be able to push myself in the gym and start keeping track of the type of results that I'm looking at. And after that point on is whenever I realized how much fun it actually is to go and train, go and work out, and be able to start tracking where you are at point A as you are on your way to point B.
Yeah, I think that's one of the coolest aspects of fitness is the not that it should be like the only thing you care about, but the ability to physically see those results. There's so many things you do where you might have like an improved cardiovascular system or improved immune system or improved brain functioning, but so many times we can't really like physically see it. And I think that's such a cool thing to be able to do and lift weights or do cardio stuff or do whatever and like see a little bit different, see something that we're doing is paying off physically, see it. I think that's one of the coolest aspects to fitness.
Absolutely. I agree.
So how long did it take you to start working out, get a little bit into it until you decided, hey, I want to actually compete?
Initially, whenever I went in to start going in and train, for like the first good 2.5 years, it was purely just for the intention of wanting to put myself in a better state physically to where I'm not just going to be there skin and bones or very, very skinny throughout my adult years and put myself at risk potentially on the health side. And so after those 2.5 years passed, I realized I am really starting to develop a very large enjoyment for what I'm doing. And I wanted to see what I can do to stay competitive with that competitive nature that I had going through those 13 years prior of just playing baseball. So taking that love of exercising and fitness and looking at it competitively, that's where I found the idea of doing bodybuilding and going down that route. And around that same time was whenever I met Slada. And at that point, Slada was like, all right, let's go ahead and start setting a date for this competition several months down the road. And let's start training and preparing yourself for that first competition from there.
Did you think that, or like have a mental shift in training when you actually did sign up for that? Was there any like, oh gosh, I have to, really push it?
Yeah, absolutely. There was definitely like that sense of urgency where, for the most part, training in general to make yourself to the best physical version of yourself that you can be is one thing, but training and preparing yourself for a bodybuilding competition is completely different. While you may look as physically best as you can possibly be, the preparation to get there is going to be extremely painful and in some degrees pretty unhealthy for you, where you're having to restrict how much calories you're taking in. It's not going to be very healthy for you to maintain for several months at a time. So it was definitely a very big shift in like that mental preparedness going into that competition, where the types of workouts that I'm having to do are extremely more rigorous, having to kind of prepare myself on a diet standpoint to kind of change the way that I'm having my food intakes throughout the day as well. So definitely a very huge shift.
Yeah. And it seems like it's so interesting when you go from like performance, like, or like doing something for health benefits to a performance side, into where you do see sometimes like the health benefits do start to drop off at some point. And I think it's so interesting how, if you're, hopefully if you have somebody good around you, you can minimize that and then like start to, after the competition, start to, bring that health back up, obviously, the benefits to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's so interesting how you look at somebody like on stage or on the field or wherever, and you think, oh, that person must be in, the best shape. They're the healthiest people in the world, but a lot of times they might not be the healthiest, even though they might be, the peak athletes.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's always kind of that darker side of that sport where it's like they look like absolute Greek gods up there on the stage, but the preparation, the dieting that they had to do to get to that physical state can sometimes look very, very painful, very hard to do. And looking at it in the big picture might not always be the healthiest. But of course, if they have someone there on their side to help them after those competitions or even preparing up to it, they can mitigate and kind of minimize how much that's actually going to be hurting them down the road.
Did you have anybody in your life, say, oh, don't do this, or maybe consider not doing it, or anything like that? Was there anybody kind of scared for you to do it?
I want to say that there was anybody particularly scared for me to be going down that route of bodybuilding. My mom used to do female bodybuilding a long time ago, back whenever I was a child. So whenever I brought up the idea of me going down to compete later on down the road, she essentially just wanted me to be aware of what I was going to need to have to do in order to prepare for a bodybuilding competition, and just be like, be very conscious of what it is you're going to have to intake on a daily basis, how your training is going to have to be, and just kind of being helping me be aware of what's going to have to come down the road, but not so much scared for me on the health side, because at the very least she knew if I was doing anything stupid, she'd be one of the first people to see.
Yeah. And when you were a kid, did you, or like looking back at it to when you were a kid, did you maybe think, oh, this is, I now realize what she was doing when she was doing this? Or like, did you have any of those things, like look backs and realizing things?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Looking back on it now and kind of just looking back in her competition prep and just kind of looking at it now, I'm I'm genuinely just like, holy shit, to have to do that and try and prepare for a competition, regardless of whether it's male or female, it's going to be pretty rigorous if you're wanting to perform at your very best on stage. So I definitely developed like a newfound sense of respect looking at the competition prep side, looking back as a kid and looking at it now.
Yeah, and it seems like it would be so challenging to have a family and put that much time into yourself and your diet and your workout and your rest and recovery and all these different aspects. And then I also have to, watch out for kids and all that stuff. It seems like that would be such a big responsibility compared to somebody who is, single, doesn't have any kids, and they can just put everything they have into themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I know she had me and she had my two younger sisters, and having to maintain a family and go into preparing for a competition definitely is not going to be the easiest thing to just put aside time for. I definitely remember her having to wake up early in the morning just to make sure she got there to like 24-hour fitness and was able to go and train as much as she needed to, instead of having to try and cut out a large chunk of the day during the every day just to make sure that everything got taken care of. So absolutely, yeah.
Did she give you any like specific advice, like, hey, do this, don't do this, watch out for this, or anything like that?
She definitely made sure that I was taking in some supplements along the way, as far as like any omega 3s, anything to help with the overall heart health, the liver health, as I'm preparing for a competition. Because as there's going to be a restriction in calories and there's going to be a restriction in how much food you're going to have to take in each day, naturally there's going to be a pretty substantial difference in how much nutrients you're going to be taking in. So she wanted me to also make sure I'm having those supplements to help kind of take care of those signs that are lacking as well along the way.
And I remember watching this documentary, and it was this one scene where there was a bodybuilder in his bathroom, and he had like, I would say like 50 pill bottles and just like, taking who knows what. It's probably just like you said, just so many different vitamins and minerals and things necessary to keep your body going.
Oh yeah, I mean, looking at like a bodybuilder's pill cabinet, sometimes it's like, are they genuinely all right? I mean, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot of things that needs to be taken into consideration, and to make sure that you're performing at your very best, and feeling your very best, especially during the competition prep. It's absolutely important to make sure you're having those supplements and vitamins there to help make sure you're able to maintain yourself at 100%, or at least as close as possible when you're having to perform at a severe calorie deficit sometimes.
How did your diet change after, you went from just doing it to competing?
Yeah, so in that situation, the shift that ended up happening, I mean, back whenever I was just getting back into working out, I mean, I was just ready to eat anything and everything that was there at the table, because my biggest goal was I just don't want to be 150, 160 pounds anymore. I want to be able to at least look like I have a little bit of meat on my bones. So I was able to just go and eat anything and everything that was there. But after I started going into preparing for bodybuilding, that's whenever I had to take into consideration of what's going to be the leanest cut of meat that I can eat. What's going to be the best way to start preparing and cooking my food, whether it's going to be more calorie dense or less calorie dense to bake the food that I'm about to eat, or if it's going to be better to just put it there on the grill and cook it that way. And just taking into consideration, what cuts of meat am I eating? Am I eating like chicken? Am I eating steak? Or am I eating fish that day? And just also considering the side dishes that are going along with it and how many calories are going to be packed into those along the way as well.
How much more time do you think you spend on the diet side of things, just preparing food and thinking about what food? How much, like, I think that would be, definitely a lot more time consuming than just being like, oh, I see this, I want to eat it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I spend more hours in the day just trying to figure out what it is that's going to be made and cooked and going out and grocery shopping for the food itself. And there is going to be me in the gym, because the amount of thought and consideration that's going to be needed to put into what's going to be cooked throughout the week, what is actually going to be in the food itself, is definitely a very time consuming process, especially at first when you're trying to figure out what's going to be the best meal plan, what's the best diet to go with. But eventually, after that's all figured out, it can just become a very routine process of, now I know what foods are going to be the best. I'm just going to go ahead and buy these, get them, prepare them for the week, and then move out from there.
When you really started to dig into your diet more and focus on it more, did you find that any specific foods worked better for you, that some people, may think this would be good, but then you tried it and it wasn't, your body maybe responded weird to it or whatever? Like, was there any food or any beverage or anything like that?
Generally, I mainly stayed, for the most part, at least at first, stayed pretty along the traditional route of like the chicken, rice. But along the way, of course, as boring as it can be, finding new ways to kind of mix it up and find new ways to cook it, new seasonings, new ways to prepare it always helped. I know one of the hardest things sometimes is when it comes to cooking chicken is drying it out, and it just makes it for a very bland, very hard meal to finish and stomach down sometimes. And just figuring out the process on how to cook even the simplest things just a little bit better can make a world of a difference when it comes to how much you're going to be able to enjoy your prep diet along the way.
So do you think your cooking skills definitely increased during this, or do you think because you were eating kind of the same foods, do you think maybe that they really haven't?
I would definitely say my cooking skills definitely increased from whenever I started preparing for competitions and kind of finding new ways to cook everyday foods, finding new foods to cook along the way. I can definitely tell that my cooking skills have improved, and my girlfriend definitely thanks me for that part for sure.
Yeah, I bet. Oh man, that's funny. How do you handle, as a bodybuilder, we're talking about like how important diet is and getting in specific micronutrients and macronutrients. But how do you handle situations where it's like, hey, do you want to go out to eat? Do you want to go out, your friends or parents or whoever saying, do you want to go out and eat?
So when it comes to like, especially in the competition prep itself, it's going to be very hard sometimes, because you're going to have those temptations where friends or family are going to ask if you want to go out and eat somewhere, or and sometimes it's going to be hard to say no because of the fact that either A, you weren't expecting the fact that you're going to have to go out and eat. Maybe you're just going to go and meet up with your family out at their place and just see how they're doing. And next thing you know, they're asking if you want to go out to eat either at a fast food restaurant or just an everyday restaurant. And maybe you had a meal prep already ready to go at the fridge back at your place. And it's not just like you can casually say, yeah, hold on just a minute, wait about 30, 45 minutes. I'm going to drive back to my place, get my food, and I'll tag along with you to a restaurant. So in those situations, one of the biggest things that I've really grown to appreciate is like the app like MyFitnessPal, where you can go out to a restaurant and most of the times they'll have those meals and dishes already listed out in their macros and micros on that app, so you can see what all is going to be in that food. Is it going to be high in fat? Is it going to be high in carbs? And that helps a lot when it comes to going out to eat at places, especially when it's like a very spur of the moment type of situation where you're not going to be able to have any kind of food that you made for the meal prep immediately ready to go on standby.
Yeah, I think that would be really challenging, especially for someone who just doesn't have that much experience in it yet, is to be able to kind of navigate that kind of social situation. It would definitely, I think, potentially even turn people off to it just because they aren't used to having that much structure in what they're eating. I feel like a lot of people are just like, oh, we're going to eat this maybe today at some point. But with bodybuilding, you definitely have to be on a very strict kind of plan.
Oh, for sure. It's a very polarizing difference. I know for me, whenever I was going from just working out for the sake of working out to the shift of working out for the sake of bodybuilding preparation, it's definitely different because it's a cognitive dissonance. You're really ready to just eat anything and everything once you're out of the gym. And then once you're in bodybuilding prep, you realize that luxury of going out to eat a very nice, huge, juicy steak or a nice, huge burger afterwards isn't always going to be the best call for you.
And I feel like it's one of those points to where a lot of people may even get a little off balance because it's challenging for, I think, most people to not have a yes or a no in their life. Sometimes, whenever you have to like prepare for a bodybuilding competition, I'm sure there's a lot of like black and white. Like I can do this and I can't do that. But whenever you maybe have a little bit of time before a competition, like, before you start preparing, it might be a little bit in the gray area. But do you feel yourself like sometimes struggling with that, or do you struggle with that? Or do you try to stay like super on? Like, how do you handle the time when you're maybe not as like preparing for a competition versus time when you are preparing for a competition?
Yeah, so the self-discipline in that situation is very, very key because I know it's going to be very tempting to just try and kind of go off the beaten path and just say, you know what, I think I can live to have another burger. I can live to have another extra meal throughout the day. And during those situations, I kind of just have to remind myself of why it is that I wanted to start doing this is because I enjoy doing this. I love that competitive nature of bodybuilding, and by going off my plan or going off what I am supposed to be doing, I'm essentially shooting myself in the foot and preventing myself from being able to perform and look my very best by the time that I need to go up on stage. And I just need to remind myself of these situations and remind myself of why it is that I wanted to compete in bodybuilding or compete in this show in the first place, and just use that as a reminder of what it is that I need to do to keep pushing on and find either new cookbooks, new recipes in order to make the meal prep more entertaining, find workouts and exercises that are going to make going to the gym more fun and more entertaining, and just find those small different ways to make everything a little bit more worthwhile. Because sometimes just reminding yourself and kicking yourself in the ass of why you're doing it isn't always going to be the number one solution.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, like you said, is just mindset and having the ability to, like you just said, telling yourself or reminding yourself or whatever, like it takes so much mental discipline to do that. And you mentioned that you're speaking and everything like that. Is that kind of like how you handle your own stuff too? Is this obviously what you're speaking about? Is that kind of where that started, or where did the speaking thing begin?
So the speaking thing itself mainly came in through the fact that for most of my life I was a very, very, very introverted, and when it came to talking out in general, I was very shy and very deathly afraid of having to speak out in general. But as I kind of grew older, I kind of broke out of that shell a little bit more and started learning a little bit more of what it is can be done to help break people out of that shell as well and find ways to break their own damaging habits and try and form new ones. And that's eventually where I learned about the neuro-associative conditioning and wanted to speak out about that a little bit more and try and spread the word about that kind of process. And that's eventually how I came across the TED Talk opportunity at UTA at the university.
And how does somebody get to do that? Is it like an application? Is it somebody you know? How does somebody do that?
So there's a lot of TEDx talks that are going to be held around the held around America. And sometimes when it comes to finding those opportunities, you need to be able to try and keep a keen eye out for it because you never know when one might pop up. But in order to go and speak at one of them, you typically need to put in an application first, give us kind of a brief description about what it is that you are going to be talking about in that presentation. If the board finds that it's going to be interesting or worth talking about, they'll send you in for an interview. And from that point, that's where you need to give your mock presentation in front of the panel and see how well you can actually perform that way. And from that point on, then they're going to make the decision of whether or not they'll have you speak at one of their conferences.
How was that for you? How was like the mock versus, just actually doing it? Is there more pressure?
Absolutely. I mean, we're looking at where the mock presentation, you're maybe talking to maybe three, four, maybe five people in a room, and just hoping for the best. See what sticks when you're giving that presentation. And once you get the results, you're given the decision of whether you're going to speak or you're not going to speak. If you're going to present, I mean, you're going to be talking in front of 100 plus people. And that's definitely going to be a polarizing effect from talking to a small group of people in a room where no one's going to really judge you, to where now you've got hundreds of eyes just pointed directly at you, listening to whatever it is that you're going to say. Or even worse, they're not going to listen to you. They're going to get up and say, nah, fuck this. I'm going to go ahead and leave. I don't want to listen to this. So it's definitely a very, very stark difference in that situation.
So what motivates you to want to do that, to help people, to educate them?
So ultimately, what motivates me and wanting to help people and educate in that sense is kind of just that realization that not everyone's going to be able to have someone there to help them along the way. There's not always going to be someone there who's going to be absolutely willing to give them a helping hand or give them a piece of advice, especially where they're at. So I've always wanted to be able to be that kind of person to help out any way possible. If it's through giving a piece of advice, being an ear to listen to, or any way possible, that's always been my biggest motivation. My biggest motivation, whether it's in the gym, helping someone out any way possible, even if it's just giving a spot on a bench press, to going and speaking at a conference and giving some help on a psychological standpoint on how to break habits. Any way possible for me to lend a hand is one more step towards what it is that I want to do.
And do you feel like when you start, speaking and sharing, and you struggle within your own life, maybe it'd be even just as simple as something in a workout, you're not as motivated to go finish it up or finish it as strong. Do you like sometimes feel like I can't not, because I'm telling all these other people, like, this is how you do it, I need to follow my own advice, kind of?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's really kind of down to that situation of I want to be able to eventually be that person who one day someone looks back and says, hey, you know what, this person helped me out, and they've never given up no matter how bad things have gotten. And I want to be able to help kind of be that person, and I want to live up to that expectation of wanting to be that person where they look back, they knew that I didn't give up, just like they shouldn't give up either, regardless of how difficult it can be.
So when you go speak, not to like give the whole talk or anything, but like go into a little bit of what you actually talk about.
Yeah, sure. So without going into a lot of weird like psychology details, it's called neuro-associative conditioning, but simple way of looking at it is finding a way to break the habits that you have right now by applying a lot of pain, not physical pain, but just a lot of like emotional, mental pain of where you're at right now, and being very dissatisfied with where you're at right now, finding ways to, if I'm in situation A, this is what could end up happening, and finding immense amounts of pleasure and satisfaction in going to point B and changing your situation to where you're in a much better place, whether it's mentally, emotionally, financially, or physically. Just like how it was for me, where I was extremely underweight for where I was at 6 feet tall, and realizing if I stay at this weight for a very long time, I could be putting myself at a lot of health situations, a lot of health risks along the road, but at a much healthier weight, whether it's at 180, 200 pounds, whatever it may be. I'm going to be in a much better place physically, where I'm not going to be in as much risk later on down the road.
What do you think attracts people to want to go see somebody like you, or go listen to a speech, or Google it and watch it on YouTube? Like, what do you think that desire comes from?
I really feel like that desire itself comes from the fact that everyone has some kind of dissatisfaction in their life, whether it's a very big one or a very small one. There's usually some kind of facet or some kind of little bit in their life that maybe it'd be better if it was just a little bit different, or something in their life that they would like to have changed. Whether it's they want to be losing a couple pounds so that they can feel a little bit healthier. Maybe they want to find a better job that's going to pay them a lot better. There's a lot of situations where someone might want to have some kind of change in their life, but finding a motivational montage on YouTube might not always cut it. So I want to be able to help kind of provide a little bit of insight and what can be done in a step-by-step process to make that kind of change.
And I think one thing with people when they want to make a big change in their life is they try to like throw everything out that they used to do and then start everything new. And at least for me, it's much easier to fix, a small, tiny thing and then build upon that. When people do that, it really takes a toll on the amount of time they can sustain that kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Kind of going cold turkey is like one of the trickiest things for a person to try and do, and more times than not, it doesn't always work out because, I mean, it's a huge like mental shift where everything is completely different, and it's just very uncomfortable, more uncomfortable than it would normally be. So it's a lot harder to consistently just maintain that type of change. Whereas if you just make those small, significant shifts along the way, you'll be able to make that progress and make that change and be able to maintain that new position a lot longer than you would if you just completely drop everything off and try going into the new situation like at 100% right off the bat.
I think people underestimate the amount of time that they're going to have. I think they want to achieve everything, but they want to do it in a week or a year. And they don't think about, okay, I have 10 years left, 20 years left, 50 years left, how many ever years that, realistically they probably have. They don't think about it from the long-term scale and the long-term perspective. I think maybe part of it's short-term gratification, but I think they also just think that, oh my gosh, I have to have it right now kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's very much kind of an instant gratification type of way of looking at it for a lot of people because you see a lot of ads online saying like lose X amount of inches off your waist in 30 days or lose as many pounds in 2 weeks. And so they want to see those kind of results every single time that they want to try and make a change. But in reality, it's not always like that in the grand scheme of things. And sometimes you may try and lose that like an X amount of pounds in 2 weeks. The next thing you know, it comes right back on because you're trying to do it so quickly and so rapidly that your body doesn't even know what's going on. So it tries to get right back into like a sense of homeostasis the way that it used to be. So it's just a matter of making those small, simple goals along the way. So that way, mentally, you can get used to this new kind of change, but also physically, you can get used to where you're trying to head to along the way.
And when it comes to like changing somebody's habits, if you were to like just try to give somebody some advice, if they wanted to, so if they're not really eating well, if they're not exercising really structured, and they want to lose weight, they say they want to lose weight, what would be your first like piece of advice? What would maybe be something that like a habit they could do, the first kind of thing they would maybe want to do?
The simplest piece of advice that I'd be able to give is to start with realizing what it is that's currently kind of holding you back right now. Kind of just making down a list of what is it right now that you're wanting to change and what's preventing you from making that change in the first place. And eventually making small steps, not drastic leaps and drastic changes right off the bat, but just making small, simple, and understandable kind of steps that you can make to make that kind of change that you're wanting to go towards, but also give yourself a pat on the back, look back and kind of reward yourself every now and then for the changes and the results that you are making. Because more times than not, we're constantly looking at we're not where we want to be, whether it's yet or we're so far from where we're trying to be in the first place, that very rarely do we ever look back and see that we're in a much better position than we were when we first started. And very rarely do we ever reward ourselves and give ourselves credit for the changes that we've already made.
We kind of look at where we are now and don't really appreciate what we've been doing. And a lot of times we may vocalize that. And I think words are so important to certainly changing your mindset. But why do you think that words are really have so much power when they're coming from the thoughts we have within our mind? Why do you think it's so important to sometimes not throw those words out there?
Right. I mean, more times than not, it's going to be our own voice that we're going to be hearing on a daily, consistent basis. We're not always going to be hearing our friend's voice giving us affirmations and telling us that we're doing awesome every single day. We're not always going to have our family there telling us every single day that we're doing great or, hey, we need to go out and do this. More times than not, it's our own voice that's in our head that's telling us, hey, you suck, or hey, you're forgetting to do this, or hey, why don't you just go ahead and just not worry about going to the gym today and just go ahead and just relax, eat a pizza and just let yourself let go. And so it's our own words that ends up making the biggest impact on us because they're the ones that we end up hearing every single day, whether regardless of whether we hear our friends or anybody else's voice. So learning to manage the words that we're telling ourselves is one of the most important keys that we end up having to make if we're going to see a lot of changes along the road.
Why do you think we try to, like, our mind tries to sabotage us so much? Is it a fear of failure or something else, do you think?
It's very much a fear of failure and a fear of like a pain of making any kind of uncomfortable change because as humans, we don't want to go and put ourselves in any kind of pain, whether it's a physical pain, an emotional pain, or any kind of mental strain in that matter. So we want to try and do everything possible to stay as comfortable and relaxed as possible so that we don't have to go and put ourselves through any kind of stress or any kind of pain in the first place. And so that puts us where we're kind of compromising ourselves because our our own thoughts are telling us, hey, let's not go out and do that. Let's go ahead and just relax because you know what? That's not going to hurt. That's not going to cause us any extra pain like going out to the gym is or changing your diet because now we're not going out to eat all the stuff that we used to enjoy all the time. And so we put ourselves in that kind of painful or quote unquote painful situation in our minds. So we try and tell ourselves, let's not go out and do that. And what's more is if we go and make these changes and next thing you know, it doesn't work or we end up falling off, now we're hurting ourselves because of the fact that we failed to do what we set out to do. And now we're kicking ourselves even more for that.
Yeah, it seems like so many of our hardships in life are due to the fact that it is like this short-term gratification, which certainly worked well for us when we didn't have all this security and food and everything. And oh, you see something you want to eat it because you don't know when you're going to see something again. Do you think
Mm-hmm.
that we'll ever kind of like, assuming if we stay around long enough and we're living in these societies that are kind of like we are now, do you think we'll ever have a evolutionary switch to where we think like just without having to try, we think more long term than short term?
It's going to be a very hard switch for us because of the fact that we, especially right now, we can easily just order food through our phone and next you know it's at our doorstep a couple minutes later. Or we can easily just drive out 5 minutes and be at a restaurant to get food. Same thing with trying to go to the gym or anything else like that, and that matter. So we're very much kind of wired to realize these short-term gratifications where we don't need to think 2 months down the road, 3 months down the road. All right, what are we going to do for food? Because we either have a job already giving us that money so we can further fuel that short-term gratification. But I think it's really just going to be more so of a mindset shift that we need to make to purposefully think long term and not just make these thoughts of I can just easily make an order on my phone and get the food, but what can I do to prepare some meals starting off for like down for the rest of the week? What's my plan for the rest of the month as far as preparing for food, or what's going to be my schedule and routine for going to exercise for the next couple months? It's going to be that conscious, very purposeful kind of shift that we're going to need to make in order to start thinking long term so that way later on down the road, it's not something that needs to be done purposefully, but now it's being done subconsciously where we can now subconsciously just think long term rather than just a short term gratification.
I think a lot of what you were saying right there had to do with like figuring out how you're going to do it ahead of time instead of leaving it up to the moment. If you schedule a workout for the week or for the month, or you schedule your meal plan for the week or for the month, it makes it so much easier to do it than if it's like every day you're just going into the day. You have good intentions, but oftentimes those good intentions don't work out whenever you don't have something written down or planned out.
Mm-hmm. Like you never know what's going to end up happening throughout the day, to where you may go in, wake up, and say, you know what, today I'm going to go ahead and make sure to eat healthy, or you know what, today I'm going to go ahead and pre-make my food and I'm ready to go. But next thing you know, you wake up first thing in the morning, you see a crappy email, and your whole mood is kind of shifted for that morning, and you say, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to pick up McDonald's on the way up to work, and I'm just going to get myself a McGriddle. And next thing you know, that whole shift and tone that you had planned for the day has all kind of changed now. And so you can't always expect what's going to happen in that short term moment.
Yeah, and I think the way our brain just like really sometimes sabotages us is like it'll create that response expectation to where if we do feel bad if something happens, and then next thing you know we're getting something that makes us feel better, that it's not coming from a good source, that's what creates, I think, those bad habits a lot of times.
Absolutely. Yeah. We try and look for the comfort in the comfort food itself, to where next thing you know, we're putting ourselves and sabotaging ourselves in the long run because of it.
So I think when it comes to like a lot of the stuff we're talking about, and it's success, and I think success is like, we, I don't know, maybe seventh or eighth grade, sixth grade, like you start learning like what to do to be successful, like from a not very great aspect, I don't think, but like what, or we try to figure out what success is. And then from there on out, it's kind of like we try to figure out that definition for ourselves. But I don't think we oftentimes get the best expectation of what success really is from looking out into the world, because I think a lot of times it looks like material things, or it looks like impressing other people, or it looks like, not real happiness within ourselves. And I think that's one thing that we struggle with the most as a culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're right. You're absolutely right. Kind of growing up, success is kind of portrayed to us as a materialistic type of sense. Going out and kind of picturing success as getting this nice, lavish, extravagant house, having the most expensive car out there, or sometimes it's as simple as having 100 dogs out there running around, because you know what? Every successful person is out there with 100 dogs. So, but more times than not, we fail to realize success is more of a personal sense of gratitude and fulfillment. It's what's ultimately going to make you feel happy and feel like every day that you're waking up, you're enjoying what it is that you're doing. And having that sense of satisfaction is ultimately what's going to be the biggest success that we're going to have in life. Because materialistic things are going to come and go, but your own personal sense of satisfaction and your own sense of happiness is what's going to be the most important thing that's going to come and go in your life, but it's going to be the most important thing in the long term down the road.
I think it's tricky because I think success a lot of times is like achieving a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's tricky because whenever we achieve the goal, it's like either we're happy or we're not happy. And do we enjoy the process? And then after that, whether all those are good or bad, then you got to think, what's next? What do I have to achieve next to be happy? So I think it's kind of a slippery slope when we attach like happiness and success to achieving something, which obviously achieving is good, but I don't think that should necessarily be the whole thing of it.
Absolutely. I mean, we are we're on this world for 70, 80 plus years, and we're not just a simple here's the beginning of the story, here's the end of the story when it comes to a goal, because we still have the rest of our lives to live. So we may complete and achieve one goal and have one success in our lives, but there's going to be that question of what now? What's next? And so we can't base our entire life and successes based on just one goal, albeit whether it's big or small. Life is going to keep on going on, whether we fixate on that goal or not. So we need to realize there's going to be a lot of steps. There's going to be a lot of goals that are going to come and go in our lives. And we can't just base our factor of success on whether or not we hit one goal or not.
Yeah, I think it's tough. You know, the mind is tricky. It's part of us, but sometimes it feels like it's a different thing and completely. It's like we have these different aspects of our life, and we it's like we reside somewhere else, and a lot of times it feels like we're analyzing everything from so many different perspectives. It's hard to make each of those perspectives happy a lot of times.
Right. And like I know it's going to be hard sometimes to like not be materialistic and look at someone else who's driving the newest Tesla, driving a Mercedes or driving a Lamborghini and be like, man, that guy must be doing really great in life. They must be really successful. Why can't that be me? But then, I mean, for all we know, the guy driving the newest Tesla and the Lamborghini is probably looking at the person with a beautiful, happy family and saying, man, that guy must be really successful in life. Why can't that be me? Because we're not always just going to be sitting here with the nicest cars and the most lavish houses and see that as success once we actually have it. We're going to be down the road realizing, why aren't these things making me happy? Why is it that I achieved these goals and achieved what most would call success and realize I'm still not happy? I want to be able to feel satisfied and feel like grateful for what it is that I have in my life. And that's where that real sense of introspective needs to kind of come in and figure out what is their own personal definition of what success is.
If somebody wanted to change, make a change within their life, whether that be a big change, small change, doesn't matter. What would be your biggest piece of advice for someone to start making a change within their life?
The biggest piece of advice that I would be able to give as far as making a change in a person's life would have to be to stop looking outwards and what everybody else is doing to make the changes in their lives, all these crazy steps that are being done, and realize you're your own individual person. And the best place to start is from looking at yourself and kind of starting inwards and seeing what it is that you can do physically or personally to make the steps to change. Like I mentioned earlier, kind of look at what it is that you want to change and kind of looking introspectively at what can you do to make the changes right now or what's holding you back, whether it's externally or mentally, what's kind of holding you back so that way you can start making those changes moving forward.
So much of it, I guess maybe all of it or pretty close to all of it just comes from within us, and you have to have it right upstairs a lot of times to start making those changes. It's kind of where it all begins.
Absolutely. And one thing I mentioned in my TED talk at the end is all these great feats of changes and success, they're not always going to be just a one man journey. It's always good to reach out for help and have a friend there to help you out. And for some people, like you mentioned, sometimes it's best to have everything kind of good to go upstairs. And it's always all right to reach out to get some help, whether it's through the means of therapy or finding someone there to talk to, because no matter how much we may want to change, if our internal voice, our own personal voice is telling us, hey, we're not going to let you do that, and we're not going to let you think the way that you want to think, it's a lot harder to try and make that lasting kind of change. So it's always all right to get help, regardless of whether you're male or female. It's always okay to reach out and ask someone and let someone know, hey, I'm doing well upstairs. I'm going to need some help.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's one thing that's getting a little bit better is having that available, but also the stigma around that is getting a lot better because people definitely deal with things within their life and they cover them up for so long, like try to bury them. And there's nothing wrong with definitely going to see somebody getting help because there's so many people who know what they're doing when it comes to the brain and the mind.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
All right, man. Well, it was great talking to you. It was great to get to meet you and learn a little bit about you and what you do and how you help people out. And just a good chat overall.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to get to talk to you. I'm glad to be able to kind of give my input on a lot of situations, and it's definitely great to be able to help out and talk a little bit about this. I'm always going to be more than happy to talk and lend a hand to anyone who may have any questions or just need someone to listen to. I'm always here to help. I'm always glad to help.